I teach at Florida State University College of Law. I've been there now for 22 years, and my specialty is kids. And when I think about kids, and I think about the work I've been my research and also my advocacy on kids, I find a common theme, and that is I'm primarily working with institutionalized children. And so what I want to do today, the first thing I want to do today before I forget, is put a number down. Hopefully everyone can see it. 117. And by the end of my talk, that number will make some sense. So I'm talking about today about the harm of institutionalization, the harm of placing kids in institutions. And when I think about this, I think about my own days as a young person and as a little kid, my own experiences with institutions. My first experience I ever had with an institution was I was like 4 years old. And my parents, who are good parents and made good choices, usually made good choices, made a real bad choice. And it was an Easter, and came from a Catholic family. It was an Easter. And I wanted an Easter chick. When those little Easter chicks, they're pink and blue. Terrible idea. Terrible idea. And so I pestered my parents as a 4-year-old to get these Easter chicks. And somehow, I can't believe it, but somehow they caved in. Bad choice. They caved in. And so for Easter, I received a dozen chicks. Blue and pink little chicks. And so what happened was, what usually happens with these little chicks, they grow up. And they became roosters. And in my backyard, we had a fenced backyard, they were like little dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus Rex, chasing me all around the yard. I hated these roosters because for me they weren't roosters. They were roughly my height, and they were chasing me. That's the only thing I knew. So my father says to me, you know, Paolo, there's an orphanage in our town of New Britain, and the children in the orphanage would love to play with the roosters. So my father, as most kids, or not most, but some folks in the 50s had a station wagon, so we put all these roosters in the station wagon. They're cackling and making a total mess. And we drive up this hill. We go into the farm area of, this is New Britain, Connecticut, center of the state. And there's kind of a deserted farm area, and there's a big hill, and there's this Gothic building. If anyone read the book, The Name of the Rose, or saw the movie, you know, it's this kind of Gothic large building. We drive there, and we drive to the front door of this large Gothic building, and it had a big round door, huge wooden door. So my father gets out of the car and knocks on this big wooden door, and instead of opening the door, and I was a 4-year-old kid, I remember this, instead of opening the door, they just moved a piece of wood. So the little piece of wood was moved, and my father just yells in, "We have 12 roosters. Do you guys want these roosters?" And so someone behind the door says, drive through the back. And then we drive through the back, and we gave the roosters to this fellow back there. But the point of the story was my first experience of institutions is that institutions are places Well, the first thing is I want to say is I never saw anyone. I never saw any of the other children. The door was always closed. And that's very common when we talk about institutions. Whatever type of institutions we have, in many ways the institutions, the children are hidden. They're behind the closed door. And so that's one of our common traits we're going to hear about today when we talk about institutions, is this fact of closed universe, closed doors, and the consequence of having a closed door is lack of interaction with the community. Lack of interaction in the community. Now, many years later, I'm teaching at Florida State University, and a judge in South Florida appoints us to a case dealing with a medically fragile child. And I direct a children's advocacy clinic at Florida State University. And so my student was then, she became a guardian ad litem, so maybe you might, some folks here might know her name is Carolyn DeVita. Carolyn DeVita. So Carolyn and I, we take a road trip to visit, I'm going to call her Tina, the girl. And Tina is living in a nursing facility in South Florida. And what happened to Tina was, as a baby, she was a shaken baby syndrome. So her mother's lover physically abused her by shaking her so hard, and she developed global cognitive deficit. Global cognitive deficit. What happened to Tina is that, and this is a good thing, there's not too many good things to be said when it comes to our foster care system. But here's a good thing. There was something called medical foster care. And medical foster care is an excellent program. The major problem with medical foster care is you never can find a bed available. That's the major problem with it. If you find a bed available, it's usually an excellent program. But there was a bed available, and let me just step back for a second. Medical foster care, what's neat about medical foster care, it's paid for by Medicaid on one side. So Medicaid gives a monthly check, and also it's paid for by DCF. So there's two funding sources when it comes to medical foster care. So she was with a medically foster care family, and Tina was getting that one-to-one contact and interaction that she required. She had what I call a sensitive caregiver, a caregiver that does something called serve and return. Serve and return. Who here knows what serve and return is? Marcia, what's serve and return?
Well, it's being responsive, as you said, sensitive to the individual's needs. Responsive is the best word.
That's right. And what we're talking about from the moment the child's born, throughout those early years and later, how important it is to have this serve and return, this interaction, sensitive, individualized interaction, and constant. So she had that, and it worked out very well for a number of years until she was probably 10 years old, and she had a private duty nurse. The private duty nurse fell asleep, and she had a crisis that the child ended up in the hospital. After the crisis, the medical foster care mother could no longer take care of the child, and the child ends up in a nursing home. And was in a nursing home almost 7 years at the time we were appointed on the case. And the reason I want to tell the story is, so we go in there, the nursing home, Carolyn DeVita and I, and when you go into one of these nursing homes now, it reminds me of a sports bar filled with flat screen televisions everywhere. There's flat screen televisions everywhere, right? And they had these Disney photos and pictures everywhere. So we go into this place with all these flat screen televisions, and we walk in, and they know we're coming. So we walk in, and we go and see Tina. And Tina still, it's the afternoon, she's still in bed. So no one's even helped her get out of bed and actually go into, be placed in a wheelchair. What really struck me about this visit with Tina, there was a flat screen television going on, but the way the bed was set up, Tina wasn't looking at any television. She was just looking at the bare wall. And Carolyn DeVita immediately, as soon as we walked in, and that's why she was a great GAL, she was on. She immediately started doing interaction. She immediately had this huge smile on her face. You know, like, wow, how did she puts this huge smile on her face, and she goes up to Tina and starts talking, and starts chattering, and starts talking about her cats. So Carolyn has all these cats, and she starts talking about her cats. And then she starts rubbing Tina's arm and says, I really like your hair, and rubs her hair. And she sees a smile from Tina, and then responds to the smile and says, oh, you like that? You like that? Well, let me tell you about this. And she goes on, interacting, seeing cues, responding to cues, seeing cues, serve and return, over and over again. She's getting interaction. So we're leaving that facility, and we left that facility, say it was 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, whatever, and but we had gotten hotel rooms. And so I said, good, let's come back now. Let's go, they knew we were coming today at 3 o'clock. Let's go back now after 6, when all the administrators are gone. So let's see what's going on there. So we go back to the facility at that time. And a couple things was interesting. First thing, we were able to walk anywhere we wanted at that point. They didn't know who we were, but they let us to walk anywhere we wanted. And we saw these infants and babies in these cribs just lying on their back doing this stuff, doing motions with their fingers, just doing motions with their fingers. And so what was happening is that then we go and visit Tina, and and again, Carolyn DeVita was great. She just immediately started interacting with Tina. And then we go back, and I say to the nurse, let me see the chart. I want to see Tina's chart. Now, the truth of the matter is, anyone spending time with these charts, they're not understandable. They're really not. But let me see the chart. So I went to see the chart. Then I started asking questions. When's the last time Tina had any therapy? No, we canceled physical therapy. Why is that? Oh, she made no improvement. Medicaid wouldn't pay for it. She made no improvement. We canceled occupational therapy. No, she made no improvement. And so then I asked about education. So where is she going to school? Oh, she gets homebound schooling. So twice a week, a teacher from the public school comes in and sees all the kids. Okay. So then I said, in this facility, like I said, they had all the flat screen televisions. They had all the Disney stuff on the walls. I said, okay. I was walking. They had a really pretty patio in the back with benches outside. And they had these bougainvilleas. I think those are big red flowers. Bougainvillea, real pretty. And so I said to the nurse, I said, when's the last time Tina ever left this facility, ever left this building? And she goes, well, let me check. About 4.5 months ago. And I think 2 things I want to take away from this. Again, these institutions, in many ways, are hidden, that these children are hidden in the community. 2, that these children need interaction. So yes, the baby and Tina were getting medical treatment. Absolutely. What they weren't getting is any interaction, any caring, any socialization, any playing, which is required. Now, one thing we're going to talk about in a little bit is it's not like this interaction stuff, this playing stuff is not as important as the medical stuff. It is more important. And we're going to start talking about what we've learned since the year 2000. That's not that many years ago, the year 2000. It's only 17 years ago. We have an explosion in this country now of studies dealing with neuroscience, dealing with what developmental psychology. And so it's no longer hypothetical what children need in order for them to develop psychologically and this is going to be the part I'm going to stress today, in order to develop physiologically and neurologically. And we'll be talking about that. So the main takeaway, I think, with the story with Tina is the importance of interaction. That it's an essential, and that Carolyn DeVita had that commitment and was willing to do what was required to interact and serve in return. So now I'd like to talk about the history about institutionalization in Florida. Because Florida, you know, we're a wild, wild state, right? In many ways, right? You know, we always have, just like the Florida man, you know, we always have very interesting backgrounds. So in Florida, what occurred was an institution was created in 1920. And this institution is called the Farm Colony for the Epileptic and Feeble-Minded. The Farm Colony for the Epileptic and Feeble-Minded. And was it created, any gators here? Gators? There's some gators here. It was created in Alachua County. Interesting story about how it was created. So in 1920, the thought was, we need to put all of these developmentally delayed children, all of these children with physical disabilities, all in one place. And there was two motives for doing this, creating this farm colony. The two motives were, one motive was we're afraid of that population. And why were they afraid of that population? Well, one of the reasons was something called eugenics. They were afraid that this population was going to have babies. And there was going to be more and more developmentally delayed citizens in the state of Florida. So that was one of the motivators. But then you had another motivator for the creation of this farm colony. And that motivator was to help people, thinking that if we give training and actually create a farm, that folks with developmental disabilities, children with developmental disabilities, and others could learn skill sets and then could move on into the community. So you had two different motivations going on at the same time. And so Alachua County wanted the farm colony for the epileptic and feeble-minded, and 3 or 4 other, Hillsborough, others wanted the same thing. And they were competing with each other, just like nowadays we compete with getting football teams and basketball teams. They were competing, who's going to get this farm colony? And so originally, Alachua County offered 300 free acres. But then Hillsborough came up with more acres. So in Alachua County, the Gators that is, they said, okay, we're going to 10 times it. We're going to give 3,000 acres to commit to create this farm colony. It's going to build jobs in our community. People are going to be working there. And so the farm colony was created in 1920 in Gainesville, Florida. And what immediately happened when the legislature created it? They did nothing. They gave minimal funding. So there was hardly any farming at all going on. No training. So there was no training at all, any training at all going on in the farm colony. So what was happening at the farm colony? Nothing. The farm colony, although its statute says nothing about race at all. It says nothing about race. But on its own, the administrators prohibited African Americans from going to the farm colony. But nothing was happening at the farm colony. And so eventually, one of the administrators said, look, we have to change the name of this compound, this facility, because nothing's happening here. We need to take out the word farm. So they did a bill to the legislature, and the legislature wasn't even willing to pass a bill to change the name. And the farm colony then, the main lesson on the farm colony is we weren't willing to fund the program. And when you don't fund a program, what happens? No training occurs, no services occur, it becomes custodial, and when things become custodial, things become weird. Because then the children are not receiving the experiences they need to develop. And when I say weird, I can't go into that story today. It would be another day about Dozier School in Mariana and about the extreme violence. And I just, coincidence, small world time, I was just walking in the hallway here, gentleman, Jack Levine. He was one of the last of the advocates who reported all the extreme violence that was going on at Dozier. So, but my point here about the farm colony was no services, nothing was happening, pure custodial, and the children were not developing. So that's our history, but a lot's happened since the days of the farm colony, and a lot has not happened since the days of the farm colony. We know a number of things that we didn't know at that point in time. So let me start off with some of the new experiences we have dealing with the farm colony, and dealing with this whole topic of institutionalization. And those experiences occurred in the last 10 or 20 years. We have a much better understanding what the result is of putting a child in an institution. There's these really great scholars, Charles Nelson, neuroscientist, Nathan Fox, and also a few others. Are just groundbreaking work dealing with the effects of institutionalization. We all knew about not providing services was a bad idea, but we never realized the depth of the bad idea. We never realized how it fundamentally changed the children and harmed the children in the institutions. And let me just talk about a few different ways that we now know based on neuroscience and based on developmental psychology, how children are harmed. First thing, real basic. Kids in institution, reduced weight, reduced height, and reduced brain circumference. Weight, height, and brain circumference. Common across the board with children in institutions. Reduced weight, height, and brain circumference. What we know is if you move the child from the institution into foster care, so you move the child from the institution into foster care, you're going to see immediately a spike in weight, immediately a spike in height. But you do not see a spike in the change of the circumference of the child's head. So foster care intervention does change weight and height, but it does not change the circumference. And we'll talk in a few minutes why that is. The other interesting studies have shown the physiology. Children in institutions do worse in running, walking, balance, gross motor skills, any gross motor skills, than children in the community. So major reduction in gross motor skills than children in the community. When you move the children from the institution to foster care, quality foster care, you see a major improvement, but you never see that it becomes comparable. So you have this timing effect that you have where the children, once they're moved into foster care, do improve in their gross motor skills, but they never improve as their non-institutional peers. Now, why is that? And we'll talk about that in a little bit, too. Let's talk about the brain for a little bit. I mean, I remember at one point, again, many years ago, people think, oh, the brain was, when you're 3 years old, it's all formed, that kind of silliness. But in reality, what we know now, not just from Cornell or to other Harvard and other major universities, because MRIs are everywhere nowadays, we know the brain and different parts of the brain develop at different times. So the brain is developing, and it's really developing until, your beginning, late teen years to your beginning 21, 22. So your brain's developing through that process. And how does the brain develop? Well, just real quickly, one thing we know is through experience. The more interaction the infant and toddler has, the more the child then develops brain circuitry. So interesting things we found out through MRIs. One is get institutionalized kid, get non-institutionalized kid. Let's just measure, no longer do the circumference, because we already said the circumference is less, right, in the institutionalized kids. Let's measure the weight of the brain. Interesting. The weight of the brain, the volume of the brain in institutionalized kids is much less than the volume in kids in the community. One theory, one explanation of that is what are they lacking? What are institutionalized children lacking? They're lacking that interaction, that constant, what I call the Carolyn DeVita stuff, that constant serve and return, sensitive caretaker, constant talking. They're missing all that stimulus, and by missing that stimulus, their brain circuitry is not being formed. And that's one explanation of why the volume is so much less. And then another interesting thing about the brain is, as many of us remember from our biology days many years ago, we have the gray matter and we have the white matter, right? In the brain, we have the gray matter and we have the white matter, right? And just for our purposes today, I won't go into all that, but for our purposes, the MRIs have shown that if you get a kid that was in the institution, move the child to foster care, and if that move is done before the age of 2, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but the move is done before the age of 2, you're going to see the white matter developing again and increasing. But what you're not going to see, even with an early intervention, you're not going to see the gray matter increasing. So what does that mean? That means early institutionalization, especially of infants. Early institutionalization not only affects the volume of the brain, but it affects the actual gray matter of the brain. So you think, wow, that's pretty powerful stuff. Who knew about that 20 years ago? What really strikes me, and this is again from my biology days, is they've done there's something called a telomere. Anyone knows what telomere is? Any scientists? Telomere? Well, if you Google telomere, you'll find out it's one of the newest. There's a lot of discussion on the telomeres. T-E-L, telomere. You'll figure out. Telomere. It's considered a biomarker. So it predicts longevity. It predicts future health. And it's part of your cell. It's part of your cells. Part of your chromosomes. It's the tip of the chromosome. So when they did the cellular research and they compared the cells of kids in institutions with the cells. This is basic cell stuff, right? We're not even talking about neurons. It's basic cells with kids outside. They found shorter telomeres, which is a predictor of worse health. So what all of this, is there any positives? Not much. The one thing I think people studying institutionalized children have found, the one area where kids do bounce back, so there is one area, I missed a really important area, IQ. Kids in institutions, much lower IQ than kids outside institutions. The longer the kid stays in the institution, the progressively lower the IQ is. So the longer the child stays in the institution, the lower the IQ. But to summarize here, what do all of the one positive is emotions. Kids in an institution, especially very toddlers, facial expressions dealing with sadness, happiness, anger. They have a very difficult time responding to emotions. If you place a child at any age from an institution to a foster care, what you're going to find is the child's going to pick up emotions. And the child can develop comparable emotions to his peers outside of the institution. One more topic to show the differences. Psychopathology or mental illnesses. Well, one thing we know is this. Kids in institutions have high anxiety, makes sense, high depression. If these children are taken out of the institutions and placed in foster care, they can recover from depression and anxiety. However, there's other types such as conduct disorders, ADHD, other types of disorders we call externalizing disorders. There's shown to be no benefit from leaving the institution. That indicates that what's happening is the part of the brain that deals with judgment and planning has been impaired from the experiences in the institution. So, two things. What we know from history is institutions, especially in Florida, did terrible things, and many, many children died in institutions or simply rotted in institutions. What we know today, though, is from neuroscience and developmental psychology, we know how not only facially how it affects the children, but ultimately based on their neurons, based on their cellular state, how children get affected. And then the question is, and what is it about the institution that causes all of these ills? And I think the answer is, and this is the answer that most people give, is the lack of what I call a Carol DeVita. The lack of a constant caretaker who's going to do that interaction back and forth, who's going to be there not on a 7-hour shift, but is going to be there 24 hours a day, and who is sensitive to the child's cues of distress and happiness and can go back and forth. What am I describing? Normal, or simply a parent, a loving parent. And it's so interesting that all the neuroscience and all of the developmental psychology, really the bottom line when you get to, okay, after you study all the results and all the tests, and you ask, well, what's the answer to fix this problem? The answer is a constant caretaker who is totally committed to the child, and that's what we call love to the child. And we see major then changes. But it's important to realize that we're not seeing, if the child's been institutionalized, because of the brain being injured or not developed, we're not seeing recovery in all areas. So, okay, well, how does that have to deal with you guys? So why is this important for you, and why isn't this just a history or a science lesson? Here it is, right here. This is why it's important. There's 117 children from 0, that means under 1 year old, to 5 years old. 117 children in the state of Florida, foster care children, in group homes in Florida, in foster care group homes. We know this. So you have 117, the most vulnerable population that needs experience to develop is in group homes. What's missing in those group homes? The constant person who is going to be doing that interaction, who's going to be sensitive, who is going to respond to the child's needs, who's going to develop something that's called an attachment relationship with the child. And we also know in the state of Florida, and this, by the way, this is as of 3 days ago, the number is increasing of how many very young children we're placing in the state of Florida in these group homes. 58% of the group homes in Florida that DCF pays for are what's called shift workers. They're shift worker group homes. Shift worker group homes means that 8 to 5. They work a shift, second shift comes in, then third shift comes in. What's missing with shift workers? The constancy. Again, young children especially need constant. Yes?
I just had a question. When you were talking about group homes
Yes.
versus something like a skilled nursing facility,
Yes.
are the numbers and the statistics still the same about like the brain circumference or the weight and the height, the different physiological aspects of how they're lagging? Do you see that those same numbers or same issues with the group home model as a skilled nursing?
The answer is yes. I think what we're finding is that it is the essence of an institution that creates, it isn't, I mean, if I may go on a tangent for a minute. Well, my first time I've ever done that, I guess. Back to Dozier, right? Dozier is a school for boys in Mariana. And at Dozier, they had this person who, I don't know, he's still alive, so I got to be a little bit careful what I say, you know. But he was in charge of punishment. He had one arm, and he had this very thick leather belt. Not belt, it was more like a leather strap. And he would whip and whip and whip until pieces of flesh were flying on the child. And so you had that level of institution. But let me say this. This level of failure to provide interaction where you develop brain damage, where the brain isn't developed, is just as serious. And so we have 117 right now. Any Miami folks here? Oh, a lot of Miami folks here. Raise those hands. Guys, you're doing terrible in Miami. You guys are doing terrible in Miami. So let me give you some talk about that. I mean, it is awful what's happening in Miami. Why? Miami is taking the lead in the state in putting the 0 to 12s into group homes. 4 times as often than the rest of the entire state. 4 times as often. Not that I brag about, right here with DCF here, brag about Big Bend community-based care. I'm not bragging about them. But we have 0. We have 0. And you look at the other community-based cares around the state, most are 0. Every once in a while you'll find a 1. In Miami, just the 0 to 1 as of yesterday. So my numbers are pretty up to date.
So let me ask you this question.
Well, let me finish my point. So as of yesterday,
Do the total complement.
no, I will. As of yesterday, they had six of the 12 that were statewide of the 12. And just one more comment on this, then I'll let you go. I will, I promise. I don't think it was a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that of the 12 statewide who are under 1 year old, that half are black. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's a factor. And, but I'll hold that comment, but I want the gentleman to go first.
No, my question was twofold, because your definition of institution is very broad, and I'm not exactly sure.
Right.
I work for the Department of Juvenile Justice. I
Oh, good, good.
put that out there.
DJJ.
Yeah.
Good.
But the first question is, what do you define as an institution?
Yes.
What is the length of stay before you get into this issue of, because a lot of our facilities are short-term.
Right.
The other question is related to that number and the majority of it being in Miami. What do you think is the reason why Miami has these numbers? Or does it have to do with how they're doing things or the population that they have?
Population, no, because we're doing percentages. So percentage-wise. So
No,
for
but there's a different population in Miami in terms of, because it's the largest
Right.
metropolitan area in the state. And so
Absolutely, I agree.
arguably, there is, I'm not justifying
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
I'm just saying, and there may be a different demographic here. I don't know the reason.
Well, let me explain why I don't think so. One, Mark here is with the Guardian Ad Litem program. Mark, in Tallahassee, Florida, who decides placement of a child? DCF. Who decides placement of a child? Practically, real practical.
Practically, it's usually we're working with the courts in terms of getting names, providers, or getting people sent out.
The case management, very good. Whoever, very good. Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer was one of my students. Yes.
Ultimately speaking, though, at the front of the case, we're asking for specific names. Who are relatives you have? The first always look is to try to get a relative.
There's case managers, if I may. What's that? Yeah, community-based agencies have case managers, placement officers. Sorry.
Doesn't the court have the final say with these places?
Yes. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Yes and no. No and yes. Oh, okay, class. Oh, please. There it goes. Let me try to. Well, you're raising all these good issues. Okay, so let's say you're an advocate in front of Judge Walker's court. Okay, you're an advocate, and I know Ryan would never do it because Ryan represents the children, right? That's what DCF does. But isn't your title part of your title? Children's Legal Services, right, Jennifer?
Children's Legal Services.
Okay, so I know you guys wouldn't do it, but let's just say it happened. Let's just say it happened, okay? And they want to place a newborn in a group home. Well, what can be done about that? First thing, there's something called the Convention of the Rights of the Child. That is the international treaty that every country in the world signed, except the United States. At one time it was the United States and Somalia, but then Somalia got its act together. Then it was only us. But the major principle in the Convention of the Rights of the Child is best interest. That's the international human rights for all children is best interest. Well, even though we didn't sign the convention, Florida has adopted the best interest standard. Now, can a judge specifically pick a placement? No, the statute won't allow that. What can a judge do? The judge are allowed to place conditions of placement. conditions. So what can a judge do? A judge, first thing you need to have an advocate. So you need to have Mark. Stand up, Mark. This isn't Mark right here. Turn around, Mark. Mark is a great advocate right here. I've seen him in court. He's a great advocate. So you need an advocate like Mark, who's a GAL. Stand up there and say, Your Honor, we want an evidentiary hearing on the conditions of placement. And you know something? You will not be able to find any psychologist, child psychologist, in this country, I don't think, that hasn't lost their license, who doesn't know all this research, who doesn't know all this attachment theory and the importance of what's going on with neuroscience. They all know it now. And so you can sit down now. You can sit down now, Mike. You're so good. You're so good. They then can, with your witness, you can say that the child will be harmed. It will be harmed if placed in a group home without a constant caretaker who's going to do serve and return, who is going to facilitate experiences. And that can be shown now. And so there could be an argument then can be made, and the judge can impose that condition. And then the group home is going to say, oh, I can't do this. And therefore, the community-based agency is going to have to find a foster home. Now, let me get back to my thought. Yeah, my talk. Yeah. So what is happening is, so there's these foster parents. And a lot of people become foster, not a lot, some, I should say some. Some people become foster parents, why? To adopt. Wait a minute. Some people become foster parents to adopt. There's these babies. These are newborns. There's these babies. So if they became foster parents, then they could adopt them. But wait a minute. Why can't they find a foster parent? Because they're not the color they want to adopt. So I think you have part of what's going on here is this history of racism that cannot be underestimated. But that said, okay, that's our history. Simply, the community-based agency can find a foster home. Now, one last thing that I guess, does anyone know how much a foster parent gets paid a day? Very good. Whoever that's very good. A student. Went to FSU, I hope. Oh, okay. At University of Miami, there is Bernie Perlmutter, who's my great friend, and he's an excellent advocate. It was 1633. Does anyone remember offhand what a shift worker, that's 58% of shift working group homes, how much a day for a child? It's 100 and something a day, so 100 plus a day. Plus. To put a child in a group home. So why are we doing this? It's harming the children. It's costing a lot more money. Why are we doing it? Well, that's where I go back to my farm colony story. Why did Alachua County want it? There's economic interest. Anytime you create an institution, you create economic interest, and they have lobbyists, and their lobbyists are there in Tallahassee. And they're pushing for these children to go into the group homes. And that's really is, I think, the answer. I don't think it has to do with the diversity of population of Miami. I think it has to do with economics.
Yeah, well,
And
Probably the reason. You didn't go into the other question, though.
I will. The other question is, what is an institution? The answer is very simple.
Duration.
If I will. I'll address that too. There's a phrase, lipstick on a pig. You can put red lipstick on a pig, but still a pig. You can put flat screen TVs. You can put Disney pictures, but still a pig. Okay? So what is an institution? Do you have to have that one-armed guy whipping the people to be an institution? No. What is an institution? It's a place where you deprive the youngest of children of experience, where you do not provide that constant family-like caretaker. That is what an institution is. So in Tallahassee, DJJ has a detention center.
They have one everywhere.
Yeah, they have it everywhere. But I bet ours is special. Ours is special. Our detention center looks like a World War II atomic bunker. It's all concrete. The beds are concrete. It is the most unfamily model that can exist. And so in the DJJ world, or in juvenile justice world, it's all the same. They call it the Missouri model, where you try to have a family. The bottom line is, what we're asking for here is not hard. What we're asking for here is programs that are family-oriented, family-like in the sense that you have a caretaker who is committed to the child. Now, the issue of duration. Big issue, no answer. No one has to answer on the issue. We know one thing for sure. 0 to 2, wow. Duration is real, major impact. Up to the age of 5, absolutely. 6, yes. 7, yes. But then we talk about teenagers. So does that mean it's okay to put teenagers in these facilities? Do teenagers need parents? They do, right? So it might not be based on the neuroscience when it comes to the teenagers, but even that's not clear. So, but to answer your question, that's the big debate right now in neuroscience, is how long and what age? And there's been no answer to that. Ryan.
I would just think of one thing on a solution, and we should really try to focus hard on the front end, like when you're getting into a case, cases getting being brought up front, finding names of people who are interested, getting not people in the community that have an interest in helping it. Really, and on the other end, with the community-based care or the case management facilities recruiting, who are they trying to recruit? Is it wasteful efforts? Could they better spend their money trying to advertise and try to figure out better ways of getting the right type of person who's actually interested in it? So hopefully you're trying to convince somebody to be something.
That's true. That's true. Let me give you my take on it. My own opinion is I like what they do in France, and I like what they do in other countries. In France, they don't pay $16.33 a day. They give a salary that's above minimum wage but below the average, but above minimum wage, so a person can really commit themselves to this project. In Florida, we do a very bizarre thing in Florida. I forgot who was it, someone over there? Hi. This is $16.33 a day for foster care. We have a range. It's like the youngest children, I think, are $16.33. But if you go to the teenage children, it's a couple dollars more. I can't remember the exact number offhand. A few dollars more. No, it's more. That's the bizarre thing. We pay foster parents. What's that? They eat more. I guess that's what they're thinking. No, I guess that's it. That's all. But the point is, the opposite. That is these young children, 0. The young children need the 100% attention. And the older the child, they're starting to explore on their own. But yes, they do eat more too.
But isn't that supply and demand thing?
It should be. There are less foster parents out there that are specifically looking for or willing to take teenagers in.
More foster parents want younger children.
Yes. With the idea that you were speaking of adoption in the end, a part of it.
So what's some of the answers to this, to follow up on these questions here? Last summer, I live in Tallahassee. I needed a new roof. I hired a roof company, and it was hot. It was like, incredibly hot in Tallahassee, but the roofers were up there, and they put a new roof on my house. They did the job because they were getting paid. And I know folks disagree with me on this one. This is not based on neuroscience and developmental psychology. This is based on Paulo and Eno's worldview. That's all this is based on. I'm telling you up front. But the way I look at it is, we have a major problem in finding quality foster care parents, and I think we need to start paying them sufficient to encourage them to do the job that's required.
And where you're located makes a lot of difference.
And
how far that 1633 goes a day.
And another major problem with the group homes is a large percentage of the group homes are not in your communities. So the child is in Leon County, and they move the child to Orlando. And if the goal of our whole protective service system is reunification, the goal is permanency and reunification, how can the parent rebuild their relationship if the kid is all the way down in Orlando?
The other goal is normalcy.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The other goal is normalcy.
Right.
We're not meeting that.
I mean, also, a lot of times, the court will also set in specific guidelines that the child cannot leave the county or jurisdiction without approval of the court beforehand. So that to justify that, I don't know, particularly with every court's the standard language, but I can at least say like in Leon, or kind of the Second Circuit, you have like kind of a statutory language where you're trying to, the child should not be moved outside of the circuit without further approval of the court, and then kind of eliminate some of the setting off the kid.
I think that's done in Orange County or Burlington.
Right. So just to summarize here some of the points, we always knew, I think from a variety of points of view, that institutionalization hurts children. We knew that, but now we know the depth of the hurt that we didn't know before. And just want to comment one thing. The Federal Department of Justice filed suit against the state of Florida because the state of Florida was placing medically fragile children in nursing facilities. And I thought their theory of their case, their federal case, was very interesting. They said, per se, placing a child in an institution per se harms the child. And they were seeking millions and millions of damages from the state of Florida because the children were being harmed just by being placed there. And that's how strong I think the science is at this point on this issue. Well, any other questions? I think I still have some time. I don't have my watch with me. No. Oh, good. Yes. Yes.
Yes, I just want to know, I don't know how long you've been tracking these numbers, but if you've been tracking them for a considerable amount of time, I would like to know, do you think the numbers here with the population of 0 to 5 in place in group homes, has it become better or has it become worse since the department has privatized case management?
Excellent question. The issue of privatization, has it improved? Some of you might remember this fellow. His name was Jim Toohey. Some of you remember Jim Toohey. Jim Toohey is a very interesting person. He was the head of HRS. HRS, that was the precursor of DCF. And Jim he's one of the only people I know who can say this. He was the of counsel of Mother Teresa, Jim Toohey was, before he became the head of DCF. And this is before privatization. And Jim Toohey said one day, there was terrible things happening before privatization in the state of Florida. Kids were being killed just like they're being killed today. And so he was asked at a legislative committee, why isn't HRS doing a better job? And Jim Toohey said, well, you give me enough money to buy a tank of gas, and you expect me to drive down to Miami. And his point was simply it wasn't funded sufficiently. So prior to privatization, the state of Florida did not fund the child protective system anywhere near that it needed. So every time there was a failure, the system was attacked rather than the funding. To answer your question, the direct answer is I don't know. But that's the direct answer is on that one. Yeah.
It depends on the CDC and how much funding they put towards fostering and, no pun intended, but fostering and creating shelters.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone heard the answer. When it was only HRS, it was monolithic. It was one entity for the entire state. Now we have all these different community-based agencies. Some do a much better job
They've got to recruit, train.
than others. And then we have ChildNet, I guess, in Miami. Miami's Child? No, what's it? Broward. What's it? It's called Our Kids. Yes, Our Kids. That's right. Yes. Then we have Our Kids.
I think ChildNet encourages the placement of children in their homes after a certain
Our Kids.
age.
Yeah. Do you have a question? Any other question back here?
What about situations where children who have behavioral problems or they're medicated, but then they keep getting moved up from therapeutic foster homes into group homes, into, they keep
Yes.
getting in more of a group system and an institutional environment? How is that helpful?
Well, I do think at times children need to be stabilized. There's no question. Some of the children we represent are in crisis. They're in psychiatric, psychological, a variety of crisis, and they need stabilization. So they do need to go to a SIP, State Inpatient Psychiatric Program. They do need to go to a stabilization unit, but they should be there the minimum amount of time as necessary. You should not see a child in a state inpatient psychiatric program one after another, after 6 months, after 6 months, after 6 months, after 6 months. Yes?
So if you have a child, for example, who's 17,
Yes.
and essentially been institutionalized since he was an infant,
Yes.
is there anything that can be done to remedy the damage that he's already endured?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is this, that one of the positives that the neuroscience tells us about is emotions. That if a child is exposed to a world where there is positive emotions, the child at whatever age can pick that up. That does not mean, though, to answer your question, that we have the brain injuries, the variety of other cognitive problems are not all going to be there.
Plasticity.
Yes, and it's a mistake, though. I know what's for people who are stroke victims. There's a lot of discussion among stroke victims of plasticity, and stroke victims want to be real positive. They don't talk about the plasticity. Yeah, some parts of the brain have plasticity, but not all parts. IQ, frontal cortex, not all the parts. So we need to be careful on that. So just part of that's why it's so much more important that we don't allow any of these really young children. And really, the only thing I can say that can stop this is the DCF attorneys and the guardian ad litems. When the community-based agency says this is the only placement, they have to say no. And they have to have evidentiary hearings, because judges on their own cannot make this decision. This lady here. Parents' attorneys can argue absolutely the same thing. I know, I apologize. I apologize. You're correct.
I know it's kind of just like a Band-Aid on a sense, but really trying to exhaust the efforts up front in the case of contacting the parents, relatives of the parents, who is interested at the front end, so you still at least have the family connection people. Is that something though that you take it on before the case has ever reached case management on that end? If you find people that are interested up front, it saves you getting up to that bridge.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an important point, more exhaustive effort. That's really helpful on our end, I noticed, is that we have a good coordination with Parents Bar, getting information, getting contact information, we get these home studies done.
Yeah, relative placement. And I do want to get back to the parents' attorneys. The goal is reunification, right? The parents want to be reunified with the kids. The parents don't want their kids harmed while they're taken away from them. So yes, absolutely, that was a major flaw on my part when I didn't include the parents there. Because the parents should want the same thing as the GALs and the DCFs on the case. Mr. Donovan.
Well, the constant response I get is, this is the only choice we have.
Ah.
I don't have another choice for them. They can't live at my house.
Well, do you have that solar heat yet you were getting?
So that's the constant response. We never ever do something.
Okay, so the constant response is no. Well, lawyers, and even a lot of non-lawyers, by the way, we always think just lawyers are special, but a lot of non-lawyers are not potted plants. So when you hear no, that means an evidentiary hearing. That means you file a motion. That means you get your local Dr. Freud to testify. And again, I don't think this is hard. Now, the judge then is not going to be very happy because you're forcing a judge to do something, but the judge can put conditions, and then the community-based agency can't comply with the conditions. So they're going to have to find, and how are they going to find the foster bed to take a baby? You know, the truth of the matter is, they might have to come up with a little more money, a little more jingle. But I think that's the answer. The answer is it has to be evidentiary hearings where you force the community-based agency to do the right thing. Any other questions? In back? Or in back?
Are you looking at a paradigm shift, or are you looking at individual cases to make this change? Are you looking at a paradigm shift in the way they're treated, or are you looking at individual cases to elevate?
You know, at this point in time, the individual GAL, parent attorney, DCF is individual case. But what I would hope is that once you spend the money to have the experts, and once you educate the community-based agency through litigation to do the right thing, that this issue will not emerge again in your region. I think the Department of Justice filed their federal lawsuit. I don't think this issue is going away. This is like asbestos. No, this is like asbestos. This is something, you know, this is just a matter, I mean, if I was the community-based agent, if I was the attorney for the community-based agency, I would say to them, hey, down the road, you might be hit with a huge liability here when these kids prove they've been injured in your facility. So, but the direct answer is, I wasn't here today. What I was saying is the individual case. Yes?
So what's the pushback that you've seen? I mean, I imagine this is obviously a statewide issue.
Yes.
Have you heard any reasonable arguments against the propositions that you're offering?
Yes. Not reasonable, but I heard, yes, responses, yes. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a matter of you have these institutional players who have lobbyists, who talk about how, they'll tell you about their flat screen TVs. They love those flat screen TVs. You know, and their Disney photos on the wall. But then when you start asking some hard questions, like asking questions like, tell me the ratio. I want to hear the real ratio between child and person who's actually in the house. Not child and administrator who lives in Pittsburgh. I don't want you to add that person to the list. I want the ratio of the actual child and who the child is going to be in contact with.
What
Yes.
much of that information is being told to the legislature? We understand that the CBCs and the group homes have their powerful lobbyists, but is there someone on the other side that have these statistics going and saying, listen, this is harmful to children?
Yeah, I think the leading organization in the state of Florida that's been doing this is Children's First. They've been raising this issue now for a number of years. Nationally, it's the Carol Stouffer and what's that? PQI group, that's right. Parents Quality Initiative, I think it is. Parents Quality Initiative.
Do we have any idea, or has anybody looked into exactly how much implementing this throughout all of, I guess, the program actually would cost? Is there does it change? I mean, is it? I guess my question is, are there any impediments because of the cost?
You know, I think when we look at it, because the group homes charge so much money, over $100 a day, that I do think what needs to happen is exactly what you're suggesting, at least I'm going to read into it, is like a pilot project where you have a part of it. Let's shake this out, the money. Let's shake out the money. Let's see how much it's actually going to cost. And let's do this in a part of the state. And I think that would be a good step forward. Maybe you suggested it. No, the answer is we don't know.
You talked a lot about getting the issue before the judge.
Yes.
I'm actually dealing with a very, very similar issue. I've got a 7-year-old who was in a group home. He's been there for about 6 months. He was in a family home. They closed down due to them being not appropriate with another child, and then he's been placed in this group home. He has 2 sisters in a family foster home. And local CBC was originally looking at placing all 3 children together. Our magistrate, about a month ago, maybe less than a month ago, we're on 2-week statuses on this case right now.
Wow.
Yeah, she said, no, you need to have just this one child, the 7-year-old, on a list privately, not a family foster home that will take 3 children because the 2 girls are much younger, but someone that will just take him first, because that will probably happen first. So we have a magistrate ordering that the CBC does this. The issue is that we don't have any place available right now. There doesn't appear to be any bed for this child to go to. He's had some behavioral issues in the past, but nothing outstanding that would create a huge issue. So we've gone through that process, essentially. We have a magistrate saying, you know, he is on the list, and they don't have him. So now we're stuck with, we don't have a place for him, because they definitely don't want to put him away from his siblings.
Right.
They want to try to keep him in county. So this is what we've been dealing with. Like I said, the magistrate has us on 2-week statuses. She's keeping an eye on this case so that everybody's held accountable. The CBC is held accountable. Us as the guardian ad litem, if we have the issues, you know, we can bring them up. We can, you know, everybody's trying to strategize here. So, you know, at what point, or what do we do? I mean, where do we go from here?
Just kind of 2 quick points. One is, one of the arguments that's made for the group homes is in order to keep siblings together. Well, this is my response to that. I think it's important that siblings have contact. However, it is more important that the sibling develops an attachment, a relationship with a caregiver. So yes, we should, in the ideal world, we would like to have the siblings all in the same foster home. But if we can't have that, that is not a reason to place a child without that direct, committed caretaker that's required. Now, back to your litigation issue. That's a tough one. I mean, you know, I think eventually what I would do is take depositions of the community-based agency who's doing the placements, and I'll let them justify, and let's go through each number and see exactly where there is placements and where there isn't placements.
I've had in one of my cases, the judge actually do that. He ordered that the CBC placement representatives come before him and explain what the issue was. And conveniently, the issue got resolved.
Yeah, and I think that happens at times. I think that's correct. Marcia, I saw your hand.
I think in the past,
Right. And that could be that's a good condition too, because many times a group home simply can't do that.
Right.
Now, let's say you're in the worst case scenario where the child is going to go to a group home. So that's something I'm totally against. But worst case scenario. Well, 40-something% of the group homes in the state of Florida are not shift workers. They're workers with families. So if you have to have a group home, even though I'm against even having the family group homes, it would be the family group homes would be the best. Well, thank you so much for listening to me talk. And if you have any questions, I'm at FSU College of Law, Public Interest Law Center. Feel free to send me an email. And thank you again.